All right, let's talk about our next essay. Uh, our first essay was a narrative. Now, the second one is going to be an informative genre. So, your options for this are going to be encyclopedia entries, or in this case, not so much an encyclopedia entry, but a Wikipedia entry, a news article. So, these will be your options for the written portion. And then for your multimodal portion, it's going to be a map. So we're going to talk about all of those. Now, when we think about um, informative sources, the purpose of an informative sources is not to entertain, but rather to provide information. Okay. Um, so news sources, encyclopedia entries, they're not supposed to shade or color. They're supposed to provide information as directly as possible. These are sources that are supposed to be authoritative, and they build authority. So that we talked about ethos, pathos, and logos. They focus very heavily on logos. Okay, a lot of logic. Um, in as much as possible, they're supposed to avoid author bias. Okay, these are supposed to be neutral sources that are providing information. Now, there's no such thing as a neutral source. We all come from a background that is going to shade our impression of an issue. Okay, um, but uh, for informative sources, that's supposed to be kept to a minimum, not opinion, but as factually based as possible. Okay? So we want to provide facts and details. Okay? So very clearly, this is what a thing is, this is the information about it, and this is the details that support that. Your audience is going to really depend on the purpose, what you're trying to accomplish, but by and large, most informative sources can be for a broad audience. Now, if you're doing an entry in the encyclopedia, there's a difference, for example, between doing something for a general encyclopedia and, let's say, an encyclopedia for auto mechanics, right? If you're doing an entry for an encyclopedia of auto mechanics, for example, um, that source would be more, you would assume a certain amount of knowledge by your audience, that they would understand certain terms that you wouldn't have to explain. Um, you as the writer should have a high amount of ethos. You should be again portrayed as objective, okay, very focused on not providing a particular slant on an issue, but rather just the facts. The facts should be able to speak for themselves. Okay. Um, think of accuracy and clarity as a couple of the most important things that you need to work with. Your information must be highly accurate and it must be supported with sources. If you look at Wikipedia, right? A Wikipedia article, yes, it's an article, but it has its sources listed at the end. And that's what I would expect as well. Okay? Um, so you need to, and also think about accessibility. In other words, the information should be something that a reader should be able to look at um, and understand without difficulty. Because if the material is inaccessible, that defeats the purpose of the article. So let's talk about your Wikipedia entries. Okay? So with a Wikipedia entry, it serves as a reference. In other words, somebody wants information and you are providing that information for them. Now, we all know that Wikipedia, you can't use it as a source, even though it's proved to be just as accurate as your average set of encyclopedias, and that's because the data can be easily manipulated. But you really want to focus on providing that reference material. The information should be true, okay? And so you're really going to have to watch your language. Your language needs to be neutral, okay? Um, it has tertiary sources, and what I mean by that is you have your article, but then you have references, okay? You have other sources that you cite at the end that tell people where you got your information, and you have in-text citation that also directs them. Um, they're strong in logos, okay? They're strong in logos, and your logos, the logic, this should unfold very simply, very smoothly. The language should reflect that. Um, Oftentimes, with a Wikipedia entry, you notice that there's a longer entry that's broken into subcategories. Okay, so if you're talking about a person, right, and our topic this time is villains. Okay, you're talking about villains this time. So if you're talking about a villain, what you might do is start off early life, and then you have a summary of their early life, their career, what happened during their career, their death, okay, and then you have a category there, and each one of those would have a title that breaks it out. And that also for you as a writer provides some focus, right? You're able to go to say, okay, I'm only talking about this in this section, and then in this section, I'm only focused on this. Clear, precise language, okay? Don't make it overly complicated. Don't use weird sentence structures. Keep very focused, keep very precise, use specific words to explain what you're talking about, okay? These are relatively brief, okay? So, for example, if we were giving the story of the Zodiac Killer, right? Or, not a good example, Ted Bundy, right? If we were telling Ted Bundy's story in a Wikipedia article, we wouldn't have every detail from his life. You want to hit the high points. You want to hit the important points, okay? So you can have a section on his early childhood, but we don't need to know everything that happened to him. Okay, it's not a narrative. It's not a story. It's informative, okay? So you need just enough detail. Now, often it's referential to other topics. Okay, so for example, if we're talking about Ted Bundy, right, there might be a link there to articles on serial killers, or there might be a link to an article on psychopaths and what that term means, what a psychopath is. So oftentimes you'll have like links, you'll have words hyperlinked in a Wikipedia article to other topics. Serious tone, okay? An encyclopedia article or a Wikipedia article is not a place to be cracking jokes or showing your sense of humor. It's very straightforward. It's very bland language. And images, and this is a must, okay? If you are doing an encyclopedia entry, you should have at least two images with captions, okay? And you want to set those up so that the caption explains what the picture is, okay? And should be labeled image 1, image 2. All right, so that's encyclopedia entries. That's your first option for your written topic. Your second one is a news article. So news articles are very important to keep up to date on information. So first thing is they are informative. They are supposed to inform the person, not provide an opinion. That's one of the mistakes that current news is making, and it's a huge mistake, is that there's so much opinion mixed in with the news that we can't, and it's not clearly labeled. Okay, it's okay to have opinion pieces, and it's okay to have news articles. Okay, but when you put the two together, moving back and forth between the two without any type of a clear title or distinction, everything starts to blend and merge. And this is part of where Americans can get frustrated with news. And this isn't an issue of one side versus both sections of media do this. It needs to be up to date. News stories need to be up to date. They need to reflect the most current knowledge of a topic. Okay, out of date information gets you in trouble. If something was thought to be a cure for COVID 5 months ago, and we're still talking about that, as opposed to talking about what we know now, how the information has changed, people get out of date information. For example, people were talking about, well, at one point the CDC said, masks don't help. Yeah, at one point they said that, and then they found out they were wrong, and they corrected it. So we have more up-to-date information. Ethos and logos are both crucial in this, okay? Ethos and logos are both crucial. You have to establish your credibility. And the way you do that is largely through the language that you use, through that neutral, impersonal language, okay? And then accurate reporting of the facts. That's the other way that you establish your ethos. The information has to be highly accurate. It has to be sourced. news stories anymore are increasingly multimodal. And what I mean by that, again, pictures. Okay, if we're talking about a written news article, it should have pictures. And again, if you're going to be doing a news article, 2 pictures, both captioned. Okay. Um, but if we think about the online news stories, they're often hyperlinked to other stories or other information. There can be embedded videos, that type of stuff. I'm not going to require all that, but I am going to require at least 2 images for your story. They are well researched and fact checked. Okay. In other words, you didn't just grab something that Joe Blow on the street said and go, oh, hey, that's a story. You took your time to get additional information to back up what you're claiming. And when when that doesn't happen with a news story, they get criticized, rightfully so, for not supporting their information. Now, every news outlet is going to make a mistake. That's going to happen. Oftentimes when that happens, people get fired. Or at the very least, they have to print a retraction. And no news outlet likes to print retraction saying, hey, we were wrong. That undermines their ethos and their credibility. Okay? News articles are for a broad audience. Okay? You're not, and this is, again, one of the mistakes that we're seeing today is that news outlets are narrowing and narrowing their audience by focusing in on what they think one particular group wants to hear. If you stay impartial and you report the facts, hopefully, more people will listen. You should have a tight opening so that your opening paragraph, maybe just a couple sentences, okay? News articles, unlike your average story, often only have paragraphs that are a few sentences long, okay? Sometimes 1 or 2 sentences, that's okay. If what you're trying to do is just convey what's needed to know, okay? You're not getting into all of the details. You're trying to make sure that people have all the information that they need. You should go in order of importance as you move through a news story. Okay, so the most important thing comes first. The next most important thing comes second. Okay, so as you move through the article, that's how you should use your structure of organization. You should use quotes. In other words, you should find somebody who knows some information about this thing. Or have somebody, some of you might be doing a fictional character for your villain. That's okay. You make up your quote. But you should be using quotes as part of your structure for supporting your article. This adds to your ethos. Okay, it also adds to your logos. Your paragraphs should be succinct. Okay, straightforward, to the point. You're not going on a rant about something. You're stating a fact and then moving on. Okay, and you should have a neutral tone. Okay, you're not taking a side on this. You're reporting the information. All right, so neutrality in your tone is important. And then you should have an attention-grabbing title. Now, that doesn't mean you should have a misleading title, but you should have something that states the point directly. Okay. And then you should have your sources listed, right? We've talked before about, I don't know if I talked about it in this class, but it's like going into a fight, okay? If you go into a fight, you want people behind you supporting you. You don't want to go into a fight by yourself. And with news articles, that's especially important. You need to have sources to back up what you claim. It's not just you saying this. So if you're talking about COVID, having information from the CDC, from Dr. Fauci, from epidemiologists, right? Those are your sources. You're not saying this. These people who are experts in the field are saying this. All right. And the other thing you're going to do is a map, okay? So you're going to do either an encyclopedia entry or Wikipedia entry or a news article, and you're going to do a map. So maps are spatial representations, okay? They represent a specific physical space. Now, if you're doing a made-up character, that's fine. It can be a fantasy space, but it's still a physical fantasy space, okay? It's based on solid data, okay? In other words, if you're doing a map of part of New York, then you better know things like where the Statue of Liberty is located, where Broadway is located. All right? In other words, you have real information to back this up. They need to be precise. Okay? So this, Ellis Island, if you were doing New York, shouldn't be larger than all of Brooklyn. Okay? So it should be based on correct information. They should be precise, all right, showing exactly where a thing is located. They need to be labeled. What is this thing? What is that thing? Okay? Don't just have visual representations, but you should have words explaining what these various things are. Things should be correctly located. Okay? So if you're doing a map of Oklahoma, Langston shouldn't be south of Oklahoma City. That's not where it's located. There should be a key. So if you're using blue for water, there should be something off to the side showing blue is water. If you're using the picture of one house as a village and a picture of two houses as a city, then you should have an image of, off to the side for your key, you should have an image of one house for a village, an image of two houses for a city. So there should be there should be some type of a key explaining what the symbols that you're using on the map represent. It should be detailed, okay? So I'm not asking for over preciseness, but it should be detailed enough to where I understand what's happening on this map. You should be using language on it, okay? So, but it should be simple. I don't need, a 50-word explanation of what this thing is. Just a very brief Oklahoma City. Okay, that's what I need. And then it should be neutral. So one of the things that's being argued right now is that the Mercator projection, right? And you guys probably use the Mercator projection map in your classrooms, show Greenland is roughly the size of Africa, which couldn't be further than the truth. And that it was made that way because the Mercator projection is oriented on the Northern Hemisphere. Okay, that's really its focus, is the Northern Hemisphere in the way that it projects. It's accurate in its lines, but it's inaccurate in its spatial representation. So there's arguments for other types of maps that are perhaps much more accurate in showing scale right now. And speaking of scale, that's the last thing. Things should be roughly proportionate, right? So you should have something on your key that says, for example, 1 inch equals 10 miles, or 1 inch equals 100 feet. Something that shows me what the scale of this thing is. Okay? All right. Keep up with your discussion boards. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will be happy to help you. Have a beautiful day.